is about Karen Bass. She did win the mayor race in LA, and she promised to tackle the homeless issue in Los Angeles. For those who are not aware, LA has a significantly large homeless population and tent communities, but they are not alone. This is happening in cities all across the United States, including mine in Boston. She had an interview recently on Morning Joe. Now, I want you to hear her plan to tackle homelessness in Los Angeles. And then I'm going to talk about the con, because I want you to hear the pro, and then I want you to hear the con, because there is a downfall to what she wants to do, something that maybe she has not thought about. Shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. Let's get into it.
Where, in her first official act, newly sworn-in Mayor Karen Bass declared a state of emergency on homelessness in Los Angeles. This comes as the state has been trying to combat the issue with over 69,000 homeless people in Los Angeles County this year alone. And Mayor Bass joins us now. First of all, may I congratulate you just on being the first on a number of levels as mayor of Los Angeles. It's not.
I just want to add in here 69,000 homeless people in Los Angeles. And those are just the ones that are accounted for, by the way. Not everyone that's homeless is accounted for.
The first time in your career you've been a first, but it's wonderful, very know your value moment. We've been watching the homelessness crisis unfold across the country. New York City is trying some unconventional, controversial ways of dealing with homelessness and actually taking those who are deemed mentally ill to a hospital and holding them until a care plan is prepared. I mean,
that's ridiculous. I talked about this as well. Eric Adams has lost his damn mind. And to answer your question, Deneen, what percentage are Black? 40%, last time I checked, of the homeless population are African American, which is insane because we're only like 13% of the population.
These are hard to execute ideas and policies. I'm wondering, as you declare a state of emergency, how you think you will be able to get as many people off the street as possible in a short amount of time as possible.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. And you know, this has been a problem in Los Angeles for a while, and it has exploded to the point of the numbers that you talked about. And we know that every day 5 people don't wake up off these streets. So what the emergency order will do is it will allow me to expedite the building process. It will allow me to take over certain property, and it will allow me to be able to get building done quickly. That is one of our problems. However, in the meantime, there are still people on the streets. So while we are fast tracking building, we are going to launch a program in 2 days called Inside Safe. And it's basically built upon the lessons learned from the pandemic. I mean, we have thousands of hotel rooms and motel rooms in Los Angeles. And when the motels were vacant, the city and the county did master leasing, took over entire motels. And that's what we need to do to get people off of the tents in the streets. And just think about it. In America, you have hundreds of thousands of people around the country who pitch tents everywhere and have started living on the streets. This is not acceptable.
People didn't just start living on the streets. And I'm sorry, I have to jump in here and I have to make a statement here. This is not new. Homelessness is not new in this country. This is not something that people just started doing. It's a little bit more evident now because of the pandemic. And yes, the numbers have increased, but this has been going on for years. You can go all the way back years ago, starting with San Francisco. Nancy Pelosi's district has one of the highest homeless populations in the country. So this isn't a new thing. And I just want to be very clear here. I remember when I was a kid, there was always Skid Row. There was always already homeless people. What you are seeing now, you're seeing more homeless people because poverty has increased in this country, because we are living in late stage capitalism. That is why you are seeing more homeless people. More people have been evicted. More people have been laid off. Don't believe me? We just shared a story about a housing complex here in Boston where the tenants were supposed to be kicked out before Christmas. They were going to kick them out right before Christmas. Now, United Front Against Displacement protested, and they were able to delay them removing the residents from that building, but they will still be removed. These are people that live in public housing. These aren't people that are being evicted because they can't pay their rent. These are people that are being removed from public housing because public housing has now become privatized, and you have these investors that are tearing down these buildings and they're building what they call affordable housing, which really isn't affordable for a lot of the people that live in that district. That's another reason why the homeless population is increasing. And Morning Joe isn't going to tell you that, so I have to jump in and say that. Let's go back in.
Mayor Bass, good morning and congratulations to you. What about the mental health piece of this? This is so much of what Mayor Adams is trying to get at here in New York City. Obviously, mental illness surrounds so many of the cases of homelessness in this country. How do you address the root of the problem? It's great to get people shelter. That's the first step and a critical one. But what about next? What's the next step?
Well, first of all, it is important to know that the population that are unhoused are diverse. So, for example, there's thousands of children who are on the streets, with women who have fled domestic violence. There's former foster youth that are on the street. There's people in Los Angeles who work full-time jobs who go home to tents because they can't afford the rent. But when it comes to mental illness, and I know we have all seen this on streets where people who are profoundly mentally ill, who clearly cannot take care of themselves, and someone needs to take care of them. So in California, we passed legislation called Care Court, which is similar to what Mayor Adams is doing. And I happen to believe very strongly that it is absolutely humane to allow somebody to die on the street when they are profoundly mentally ill. You can tell you can't take care of them. But here's my problem. I do believe it's important to hospitalize people when they're in a crisis, but where are they going to go after that?
So that's the piece that Eric Adams, that I mentioned in reference to Eric Adams, him wanting to retrieve homeless people off the street that they feel are mentally ill, hospitalize them. I don't think this is cool. This is involuntary. It's bullshit. He's getting a lot of pushback for this, by the way. Hospitalize them. But then after that, where do they, like she said, where do they go? Another thing I want to mention as well, she's talking about the mentally ill people that are homeless. How do they know those people that they think are mentally ill are actually mentally ill? Have they been diagnosed? This is an important question. How many of those people are actually mentally ill, and some of them may have other issues that are going on? I don't know, man. This is why I don't like this whole idea of them like picking up people off the street and saying, oh, okay, we think you're mentally ill. Let's put you into a mental hospital. How do you know?
Then raises the issue of building facilities. Now, we already do this. The facilities that we keep people in now who are profoundly mentally ill are jails. And that, I believe, in and of itself is inhumane.
Yeah, and Mayor Bass, congratulations, of course. It seems to me that when you look at the homeless crisis, when you look at, like you said, so many homeless Americans pitching tents and starting to live there in unsafe, unsanitary circumstances, this seems to be an issue that lends itself to public-private partnerships. You know, we've seen in New York City, I know you've seen it out in LA too, but in New York City, we saw a lot of finance leaders step forward and help with schools in Harlem and in other areas. Made a real difference. I'm wondering what sort of public-private partnerships are possible in Los Angeles to help homeless people get off the streets, get help, and get shelter.
No, this is the problem. When I watched this clip, I was like, did he really just advocate for privatizing public communities here? He mentions that there are financial leaders that have stepped up and have tried to help. There have also been financial leaders that have stepped up to take over public housing units. That's Manhattanville in New York City. That's Bromley Heath in Boston. That's Grant Manor in Boston. This idea of allowing private investors to come in and to assist with these efforts is a no-go, because they are not going to do it unless they get something out of it in return, something financially in return. And I want to make this very clear, because some people will hear this and they'll think this is a good idea. This is not a good idea, because let me tell you what is going to happen. You get these private investors. They say, we want to help you with the homeless community. We want to help you with the housing issue. We're going to help you build affordable housing. That sounds great. So they give you the money. They front the money. They help you build the affordable housing. Now that you have the affordable housing, they privatize the public housing because, like I said, they're trying to get paid. So the people in the public housing, they're pushed out, and then they're told, well, you can now apply for the affordable housing. Here's the problem. Affordable housing usually has an income limit, and there's a certain range that you have to be within. You can't make too little. You can't make too much. A lot of the people that are in public housing already make too little. That's why they're in public housing. A lot of them don't make enough to even qualify to get into the affordable housing units. So where are those people supposed to go? This is also how you get more people out on the streets. I cannot believe he's actually recommending this on national television. This is a bad idea. Do you know how many corporations have bought up housing and residences here in Boston? How many private investors have bought up apartment buildings and are renting them out luxury prices to people that can afford it, which are not the people who lived there before they were kicked out and they bought the building? This is terrible. Terrible idea. Now let's see what Karen has to say. Let's see if Karen really in touch with this issue.
Well, that is the only way it can be done, Joe. And it is an extensive public-private partnership that's at work here. So, for example, I mentioned the motel owners.
No. This is such a bad idea. Do you guys see the problem? That is the only way it can be done. You know what Mississippi did to fix the homelessness problem? They decided to build more homes for those people. This is not rocket science. You do not have to have a PhD to figure this out. Shahid Buttar explained this to me himself in his district in San Francisco, which is Nancy Pelosi's district. You know what he said? We have more homes. We have the housing in San Francisco. Empty homes that are not even being used. Why aren't those people given housing? This is why we need guaranteed housing in this country. This is exactly why. And here goes Karen Bass. She's agreeing with him. Yes, let's advocate for this. This does not work well, you guys. It didn't work well in New York City. It doesn't work well in Boston. It's not going to work well in Los Angeles. You cannot privatize it. You have to leave those people out of the equation. Jeez.
Owners who are making their entire properties available. We have independent nonprofit organizations that actually know how to get people off the streets and into housing. They work with outreach workers who are formerly unhoused. We have a lot of good organizations in Los Angeles, but the fundamental problem is that they don't have the resources or the capacity to address the problem at the scale in which is needed. And so that's part of what we have to do here.
The problem is states like California, particularly cities like Los Angeles, have become too expensive to live in, even for people who are professionals. Same problem in New York City, same problem in Boston. That is the problem.
Mayor Bass, Al Sharpton, again, congratulations. And certainly you know all of our people are ecstatic that you're there. And thank you for going with Reverend K.W. Toulis and the ministers as one of your first appearances as mayor on yesterday. I know you for 20, 25 years, and you're real at heart a civil rights activist. So the tension of how you deal with homelessness and deal with protecting their civil rights, but at the same time removing them, it becomes something that you've got to thread the needle. Eric Adams here is dealing with it. Lori Lightfoot is dealing with it in Chicago. You're dealing with it in L.A. How do you deal with the balance of removing them, but not having police being able to overreach or having people feel there's an overreach, but at the same time not leave people out there to suffer, and in many cases having mental health issues where they don't even know they're suffering? How do you strike that balance?
Right. And once again, I'll raise the fact that the population of unhoused is very, very diverse. And so if you are talking about people who are profoundly mentally ill, that is a situation, you know, because they might not know they need help. They might not know they don't have clothes on. They might not know they're in the middle of the street. And you absolutely cannot let somebody hurt themselves if it's obvious that that is what is going to happen. But what happens in the majority of cases is you have outreach workers who talk to people, who show them what their options are. And in Los Angeles, like I imagine a lot of other places, people literally choose to be in a tent rather than in a shelter because they know that the shelters are not safe. So this has required us to have new type of thinking for how you get people off the street.
Let's pause there for a second. Shout out to Case Steady QB. Private companies only care about profit. Housing needs to be built and maintained by public funding. Exactly. Case gets it. Case gets it. Let's talk here about what she said about people choosing to sleep in a tent instead of the shelters because the shelters aren't safe. It's not just because the shelters aren't safe. It's also because the shelters have strict rules. There are some homeless shelters that don't allow children. So she just told you that the homeless population in LA also includes children. Well, if you have a child and the homeless shelter doesn't allow kids, you can't stay there. Just a reality. There are also some shelters that have curfew. So let's say you're homeless, but you have a job. And yes, those people do exist, not just in LA, also here in Boston. Let's say you're homeless and you also have a job, but let's say your job is in the evening. Let's say you're a bartender. Let's say you're a waitress. You may not make curfew to get back into that shelter. There's a lot of things that go along with this that people don't know. So when people say just go stay into a shelter, it's not that simple. It's not, especially if you have kids.
Which is why motels and hotels is an option. You know, I worked in healthcare for a long time. I worked in the emergency room. I worked in the psychiatric emergency room. And I saw people who were brought into the emergency room. They were medicated, they were treated, and then they went to a facility that was not a locked facility, but a lot of these organizations, community groups, drug treatment programs don't exist right now. The cutbacks have been so severe that if you want residential drug treatment because you've been addicted on the street for several years, you get 30 days. Nobody gets clean and sober in 30 days.
The way that they have been framing this conversation in reference to the homeless population has been around mental health and has been around addicts. Not once in this discussion that they've had have I heard them mention anything about the people who are homeless because they are evicted. The people who lost their jobs, people who were evicted in the pandemic, during the pandemic, people who were evicted after that eviction moratorium ended. Those people do exist. And so I have to add that, and I know I say this a lot, you guys, but I have to stress to people, it is not just people who are mentally ill and people who are addicts that are homeless. I actually saw this in a documentary, not in LA, but this was actually in Seattle, where there were homeless people. They were living in tents underneath a bridge in Seattle. And those people had jobs. They got evicted. One paycheck away from being evicted. And that happened. So they were living in a tent. Now you have to raise up the money again to be able to get an apartment again. And just imagine how expensive it is to live in cities like Seattle. So this is the point. They're not mentioning this at all. They're just making it seem like it's just mentally ill people and people who are addicts that are homeless. And that is not true. Now, I told you that some people have a problem with her plan. So I want to make sure that I mention the cons about this as well. Now, listen to this. Now, this is from the LA Times. I figured, let's be local. Let's do the damn thing. A lot of LA tenants will be evicted February 1st. How will Mayor Bass handle that? Now, you guys see in that discussion that she had, not once did they mention evictions. Let's get into it. To the editor, I agree with Mayor Karen Bass that a state of emergency needs to be implemented to tackle the myriad of problems associated with the homelessness in the city of Los Angeles. However, how is Bass going to prevent thousands of people from being pushed into homelessness when the emergency tenant protections end February 1st, 2023? And evicted tenants will end up on the street. How will the mayor and other city officials urge landlords to accept housing vouchers like Section 8? Remember that time? We played that clip on RBN where it was Maxine Waters and there were all those people who were homeless. They had been evicted and they showed up and they said they needed their housing vouchers. And Maxine Waters said, there is nothing that we can do for you today. Go home. And they said, we don't have a home. She told homeless people to go home. This is what they're referring to, those housing vouchers. Let's go back in. Landlord discrimination against tenants with housing vouchers is a violation of state law, but ample evidence shows the law is not being enforced. Certainly in the short term, scheming access to hotels and motels for temporary housing is a good idea, but in the long term, low-income permanent housing is extremely scarce and brittle and recalcitrant. Interesting. Brittle and recalcitrant reasons why people become homeless in the first place must be addressed. And they didn't address that in that interview at all either. Why are people becoming homeless? So this idea that she has about putting them into motels, that's a short-term fix. I talked about this a couple months ago when they first introduced this. That's short-term. What are you going to do in the long term? They go on to say, I voted for Bass, who has made homelessness her top priority, and yet a homelessness encampment outside LA City Hall was cleared before her inauguration on Sunday. As an English teacher and author for more than 40 years, I am at a total loss for words. Hypocrisy, stupidity, narrow-mindedness, nothing can describe this. This could have been such a spectacular photo op for her first day. She becomes mayor and instantly walks among them, promising to help. Now, I think that that's just typical politics though, right? Right? That's what they do. They pretend like they're gonna help and they don't. That's nothing new. That is nothing new. But I wanted you guys to see that because I don't think this is not a long-term plan. Long-term, this is not going to work. They're going to have to come up with something else. Seriously. And they have to address the problem. Why are people homeless in the first place? The causes. So I'm sorry that that person who voted for her thought that something good was going to come here, but here we go again. Here we go again. Notori says they're always talking about it's hard to do stuff for the American people, but they can send billions to other countries. That's right. Ahmed, is that 69,000 homeless in the city of Los Angeles or LA County? I think that's Los Angeles. I'll have to double check that. Hector says mental health and homeless is around 15%. See, there you go. Raziel the Great, Karen Bass equals Lori Lightfoot with the better hairline. Raziel, why don't you do? JB says tax the F out of those rich people in your city and house the homeless. That's another thing that could be done as well. Implement a millionaire tax, just like we did in Massachusetts. Come on, California has tons of millionaires and quite a few billionaires, I've heard. Implement that millionaire tax. There you go. That solves your problem.